Hi, my name is James Nielsen. This is for FTH212, my week 2 assignment, and today's date is March 27th, 2025. Now, before I start the video, I would just like to say that there's no live ammunition present on my workbench or in my work area. Now, let's go ahead and get started. All right, here is my PSA dagger, completely disassembled. All of the components are laid out here, and I'm gonna go ahead and pick 6 of them to go over. To start with, I got the striker. So here we have the striker, and the striker's function is to ignite the primer on the chambered cartridge. That's essentially what the striker is used for. This would be considered the firing portion of the cycle of operations. All right, next we have the trigger safety. The trigger safety is exactly that. It's a safety so that this has to be pressed in order for the trigger to actually clear the frame. So this little portion sticking out here, once this goes in, it clears the frame and allows the firearm to shoot. So again, indirectly involved in the firing portion of the cycle of operations. Next, we have the connector. The connector's function is essentially to force the trigger bar downward. As the trigger is pulled, it'll ride into this groove here, forcing the trigger bar down, which will break the sear connection between the trigger bar sear and the striker. So yet again, this would be indirectly involved in the firing portion of the cycle of operations. Up next, we have the magazine catch. It's just this little piece of spring steel here, and all it does is put tension on our magazine catch, and that's about it. It just slides in, holds tension on the magazine catch, so we can securely hold our magazines into the frame. 5, a strip slide. The strip slide is going to do quite a bit. It has many functions. You're going to have basically all 8 cycles of the operation is going to be involved with the slide. You know, you're going to have feeding from the bottom face here of the breech face here. You're going to have your striker plunger safety, the striker, the recoil spring. So you're going to get not only is it going to be involved in firing, it's going to be involved in locking, unlocking, ejecting, even extracting, because as the slide comes to the rear, that's what brings it to, brings the cartridge in contact with the extractor. So feeding, chambering, like I said, the slide is going to basically be involved in all 8 steps of the cycle of operations. Next, we have the slide cover plate insert, and I feel like the real only functionality of this is to give it a nice metal to metal snug fit into the slide, and also to give more rigidity to the actual slide back plate, because the slide back plate is just a piece of plastic, polymer. So that's all that really does. Move on to part 3. All right, so part 3 is going to be critical dimension identification and failure analysis. So we'll go ahead and start with the striker. I think the critical dimensions of the striker are going to go ahead and be the actual length of the striker, the tip of the striker, your sear surface here, how thick that is. If somebody were to come in and grind that down quite a bit, that could be detrimental to how the trigger breaks. It could just cause negligent discharges. But I'm sure there's other critical dimensions on here as well. Probably the little channel here where the striker plunger rides. I'm sure if that were to wear out, or if it was ground oddly, it could cause issues. But basically, if we were experiencing any damage or failures with this, you're going to end up with a failure to fire, probably from light primer strikes, possibly even just from carbon buildup in the striker channel. Under normal wear and tear, I think that's what you would see the most, would be that striker tip being worn down, damaged, which they do make the firing pin protrusion gauges. We can check that, but I think if this was badly worn enough to the point where we were getting light primer strikes, I'd probably be able to visually even tell that it was worn out. Next, the trigger safety. The critical dimensions on this, I would say would really just probably be this little, the horn here, and it has to be the proper length to be able to clear the frame, but also engage the frame if it's not depressed. So, I don't think we'd see too many failures with this. I think the only failure we'd possibly see would be this polymer little spring here could potentially break, making the trigger safety inoperable, making the trigger in the firearm a little bit unsafe. But under normal function, like under normal use, I don't think we're gonna see much wear on these. The connector, as far as the connector goes, I would say the critical dimensions on the connector are gonna be the length and probably the angle and maybe even the height of this portion of the connector where, it's in charge of the reset. Now, if this was damaged or we were bent or just worn out, I think we could potentially have trigger reset issues. And under normal working conditions, I would say that this probably isn't gonna really wear out too quickly or very often. So that's the connector. Then next we have our magazine catch spring. The critical dimensions on this, I would say, is probably just going to be the length of it, just so it fits in the, and maybe the diameter of the actual spring, so it fits into the channel in the frame, and the length, just so it's not overextending into the, areas that it should not be within the frame. So the only failures we're really going to see with this is over time, if this spring were to wear out, we could end up with magazine retention issues, where the catch just isn't holding that magazine in firmly anymore. But under normal conditions, it's going to take a long time for this to actually wear out. So next, the slide. There's going to be a lot of critical dimensions on a slide. Think about the channels that the slide rides on the locking block in the rear of the frame rails, your striker channel, even this here on the bottom of the slide. If that were to wear out, you would end up with feeding issues. So there's going to be a lot of critical dimensions on a slide, and there's a lot of things that could possibly go wrong if the slide were to get damaged, or if a part of that component within that slide gets damaged, you're definitely going to experience some issues. But under normal use, the slide is a pretty stout piece of metal, and I don't think you're going to see too much wear and tear on them, other than your normal spots where the slide's gliding on the rails. But lastly, we have our slide backplate insert, and again, I don't think we really have much to worry about as far as failures with this or anything happening under normal conditions. Most people aren't really taking their backplate off their slide either. That's going to be more or less, the gunsmiths. So it's not something that's going to be coming off and on quite a bit. So don't think we have much to worry about with this. And we'll move on to part 4. All right, so part 4 is going to be to identify and discuss any training that a gunsmith should undergo to avoid causing any serious damage to these components. And for me personally, I believe that this platform, the Glock platform, Glock clones, they are very simple, easy platforms to work on, and there's no special tools required to disassemble it. So as far as what training a gunsmith would need would be just any, I guess, formal training, as long as they understand this platform and the cycle of operations. I think if the gunsmith had training such as SDI, even the certificate program, or the associates, or trainings just as this training here, I think it's a very easy platform to work on, and I don't see a competent gunsmith causing any damage to any of these components. So with that said, we'll go ahead and talk about these 6 components and what other components they interact with within the firearm. And first, we'll go ahead and start with the striker. The striker is going to go ahead and interact with our trigger bar here, and when the trigger is pulled, the trigger's going to roll back, and it's going to, the connector is going to be riding down on this, and that's what's going to allow the trigger or the striker to break free from the sear and fire. The trigger safety. The trigger safety is going to interact with our trigger shoe. It's going to also interact with the frame. It's going to interact with our trigger bar even. And then again, you know, we're right back next, you know, up to the striker with our connector, and everything just all works together. Then thirdly, the connector, we just talked about that. That connector is going to interact with the trigger bar as the trigger is pulled. Let's get this right here. You know, as the trigger is pulled, rotate this downward in that little groove here. I know you probably can't see on camera, but you know, the trigger bar is going to ride down in that, and that's what's going to cause the trigger bar to lower. The magazine catch spring is going to interact with the magazine catch and the frame, and that's really all that it's going to interact with. And yeah, simple one there. The slide is going to interact with a lot of components. You're going to have your, you know, your striker assembly, your ejector, the back plate. You're going to have your safety plunger. You're going to have your recoil spring in here. You're going to have your barrel. You know, it's going to interact with the locking block. It's pretty much going to interact with every component on the firearm that involves the cycle of operations. Then the back plate insert really just interacts with the, you know, the slide and the actual back plate. You know, it's just going to slide in there. That's really all that goes on with that. Now, next, how much time should a gunsmith take to replace one of these components? I decided to pick the striker because I feel like it is a fairly more involved portion of a striker fired gun, even though it is still fairly simple in my eyes. But I gave myself an hour for this job. I think that will give me more than enough ample time to disassemble, reassemble, test it, functions check it, and I feel like I'd still have time to go, you know, kick back and have a coffee, you know what I'm saying? So, is there any specialty tools required in changing this? Not really. The only thing I would say would be the firing pin protrusion gauge, just to check the firing pin protrusion after installing the new striker. But like I said, if this was badly worn, you know, I think you could tell visually, and it'd be a pretty easy replacement. All right, I'm gonna move on to step 5, which is assembling the firearm. So as you can see here, it is still all in pieces. So I'll be right back with you when I have it put together. All right, I'm back. I have the dagger all assembled, and we'll go ahead and show clear here. I do have the magazine removed already. These are snap caps on the table. No ammunition in our magazine well, and no ammunition in our chamber. So this firearm is clear and safe. Now, let's go through the 8 steps of the cycle of operations. And to assist me with that, I'm gonna go ahead and use just one snap cap here, and we'll go ahead and place it into our magazine. So we place the magazine into our mag well, and we can begin our feeding stage. So as we pull the slide to the rear, it's going to begin feeding, chambering, and locking. Now, once we have got to the locking point, we are ready to fire. We can go ahead and pull the trigger. As we pull that trigger, the trigger bar is going to ride down the connector, allowing that sear to break from the striker, which is going to allow us to fire. Once we have fired, it's going to begin unlocking, extracting, and ejecting. And it's going to lock to the back here since we only have 1 round in. So then, as we have also done that, if there was another round in the chamber, we've already begun recocking, and then we would begin this steps all over again: feeding, chambering, locking, firing, unlocking, extracting, ejecting, cocking. So that's the 8 steps of the cycle of operations for the PSA dagger. And now we'll go ahead and perform a functions check with the dummy ammunition. So we'll go ahead and place our magazine into the magazine well, and we'll go ahead and test our slide release. It worked. Now we go ahead and check our trigger safety by pressing up on the top portion of the trigger and making sure that it does not activate the trigger. And then we can go ahead and pull the trigger. We hear the audible click. So while holding the trigger to the rear, we'll go ahead and extract eject. Now we can go ahead and listen for that reset, audible reset. Now we can fire again, extract eject. Reset, fire, reset, fire. I'm riding the slide a little bit, and I didn't put any lube in it, so it might be a little sticky, but there we go, fire, and we lock to the rear. So our function check has passed with dummy ammunition, and that's all I have for you today. So thanks for watching, and I look forward to next week's assignment. Thank you.